She laughed in my face. My own daughter. Held up the necklace like it was something foul, some piece of trash she couldn't believe I'd kept. God, Mom, why are you still hoarding this ugly old junk? Who even wears stuff like this? She dropped it back in the velvet box like it burned her fingers. It didn't burn mine. I just looked at her. Not angry, not hurt, just quiet. But something shifted inside me that day, so quietly you could almost miss it. She hadn't planned to come. Linda rarely did. Maybe once every couple of months, just long enough to remind herself I hadn't died yet. She always came in a hurry, with loud perfume and louder opinions, tossing her purse on the kitchen table like she owned the place. "You could at least dust in here. Looks like a damn mausoleum," she said, swiping a finger across the glass cabinet where I kept my keepsakes. "What's the point of holding on to all this?" I didn't answer. What could I say? That the chipped porcelain rabbit once sat on my mother's dresser? That the lace doily was from my wedding day? Linda wouldn't care. She never asked where anything came from. Just saw clutter. Just saw old. She noticed the open jewelry box on the table. I had taken it out that morning, meaning only to look. Touch the past with my fingers for a little while. A brooch with tiny sapphires. The necklace she mocked. A ring too small for me now, but once it had fit like a whisper. "Seriously, this is depressing," she muttered. "Why don't you sell it? Maybe get yourself a new couch instead of sitting on that lumpy antique." She smirked, already turning away, already done with the conversation. "Hell, donate it if no one wants it. Nobody's gonna wear that stuff." Still, I said nothing. I'd gotten good at swallowing things whole, words, grief, disappointments. After her father died, Linda became someone else. Harder, faster, always running ahead, never looking back. And me? I was just someone who sat quietly in the same house, next to the same memories, wearing the same wedding ring. She glanced at her phone, sighing. "Anyway, I only stopped by because I was in the neighborhood. I've got to pick up Nathan from soccer. Try not to trip over that jewelry box, okay?" I walked her to the door. It's what mothers do, even when the door swings shut behind them, with a finality you can feel in your chest. When she was gone, I returned to the table and picked up the necklace. The chain was delicate, the clasp a little stiff. I fastened it around my neck and stood in front of the mirror. Maybe it didn't look like much. Maybe it never had. But it was mine. And it had come from somewhere. And the story wasn't over yet. The necklace had belonged to my grandmother, Eugenia Bell. Born in 1882, she lived through 2 wars, 5 births, and 1 long marriage to a man who never stopped smoking cigars inside the house. She kept her jewelry in a black lacquered box lined with red velvet, and on Sundays she'd let me sit on her bed while she dressed. I remember the smell of lavender and mothballs, the way her fingers trembled slightly when she clasped the necklace. "This one," she'd say, "isn't for looks. It carries things." I was too young to understand. I thought she meant memories, or maybe secrets. But I listened, because even then, her voice sounded like truth. When she died, the box came to my mother, and then eventually to me. And through every move, every loss, every slow unraveling of what we once called family, I kept it close. Not because I thought it was worth anything, just because it reminded me that I came from women who endured. The necklace wasn't flashy. It was delicate, gold, but not the bright kind. Old gold, a soft luster like candlelight. The pendant had 1 small blue stone, deep as a bruise, framed by 2 tiny diamonds. I never wore it out of the house. Not once. I sat at the kitchen table, the necklace still around my neck, the velvet box open beside me. The brooch was there too, the one shaped like a bird, wings spread, a line of tiny stones running along the edge. Sapphires, or so my mother claimed. I remembered her saying, "Your great-aunt smuggled this from France during the war. Don't ever sell it unless you're starving." She said it with a laugh, but something in her tone made me believe she meant it. And then there was the ring. Platinum, filigreed, the kind you never see in stores anymore. My husband bought it for me on our 10th anniversary, when we still held hands in public and fell asleep talking. The stone had a crack now. I never fixed it. I picked each piece up, one by one, turned them in the light, noticed things I'd never seen before. Tiny maker's marks, the way the clasp on the brooch wasn't quite straight. Details invisible until you're old enough to look closely. It occurred to me then that Linda had never asked about any of this. Not once. Never wondered who Eugenia Bell was. Never asked where I got the necklace or what it meant to me. She saw dust and old metal. That was all. Maybe that was partly my fault. I hadn't told the stories, not really. I'd held them in my hands like treasure, but kept them quiet. Maybe because I thought no one wanted to hear. Maybe because I thought they'd laugh. I reached for a pen and a notepad from the drawer. Wrote 3 names: Eugenia Bell, Delia Crandall, Elsie Crane. 3 generations. 3 pairs of hands that had fastened this necklace. 3 women who lived too long and were heard too little. I stared at the list for a long time, and for the first time in years I wondered, what if it wasn't worthless? What if it was never about the value I imagined, but something else entirely? Or what if I was wrong? What if it was worth something, just not to the people I expected? The next morning brought rain, not a heavy cinematic downpour, just that slow, steady drizzle that soaks into the bones if you stand still too long. I made tea and sat by the window, the notepad still on the table from the night before. 3 names, 3 lifetimes, and a box full of things nobody wanted. By noon, I heard the sound of tires crunching on the wet gravel outside, the soft slam of a car door. I didn't need to look. I knew it wasn't Linda. She never came unannounced. But Sophie? Sophie was different. "Grandma," she called, tapping lightly before pushing open the screen door. There she was, all freckles and damp hair, a college hoodie half zipped over her scrubs. She worked 2 days a week at the local clinic, part-time while she finished school. Every time she came in, the house felt warmer. Less like a tomb, more like a place still filled with breath. "You okay?" she asked, unwrapping her scarf. "You didn't answer my text yesterday." "I had company," I said quietly. "Your mother stopped by." Her eyebrows rose. She didn't mention it. "Did she bring groceries?" "No." She paused, then came to the table. Saw the open box. "Looking at the treasure again?" She smiled, leaning over to pick up the brooch. "She called it junk," I said. Laughed at it. Sophie stopped smiling. She turned the brooch in her fingers, gently, respectfully. "I've always loved this one," she murmured. "It looks like it belongs in a museum." I felt something in my chest tighten. Not pain exactly, more like the slow sting of unshed tears. "Your great-grandmother brought that across the ocean, France, I think, 1940s, or maybe earlier. No one really knew." Sophie looked up. Then why doesn't anyone care? That question hung in the air like steam. I had no answer. "She's been talking about assisted living again," Sophie added after a while. "Says you shouldn't be alone out here." "She means she doesn't want to come anymore," I replied. Sophie didn't argue. Instead, she reached for the necklace. "This one's always been my favorite," she said. "It reminds me of those old black and white photos you keep in the hallway, the ones where everyone looks so serious." "They weren't serious," I said, surprised at my own voice. "They were just holding it all in." That was the way back then. Sophie fastened the necklace around her own neck and looked into the hallway mirror. It looked right on her, not because of its style, but because of how gently she wore it. "Grandma, have you ever had it appraised?" I blinked. "Appraised? I mean, maybe it's real gold. That brooch, too. You never know. You should take it somewhere, just to see." I almost laughed, not because it was funny, but because the idea felt so absurd, so foreign. This stuff? I'd lived with it so long, it had become background. It never even occurred to me to consider its value in dollars. I wouldn't even know where to start. "I do," Sophie said, eyes brightening. "There's this guy in downtown Seattle. He's an antique jeweler. My friend's mom sold him a vintage watch last year. She said he was honest." I hesitated. I'd never been downtown alone since Harold died. "I could take you," Sophie offered gently. "Not to sell it, just to see." I stared at her. My granddaughter, who had her father's chin but none of his coldness. I thought of Linda's sneer, the way she had dropped the necklace like garbage. Then I thought of Eugenia Bell standing in front of her mirror in 1912, fastening that clasp. "All right," I said slowly. "Let's see." Sophie made the appointment for Thursday. She even offered to drive, but I said no. I needed to do this myself, not because I didn't trust her, but because I had to remember I still could. I still had a driver's license, though I hadn't used it beyond the grocery store in almost a year. I took out my old leather handbag, the one with the gold clasp, and slipped the necklace and brooch into a soft handkerchief before placing them inside. That morning, the sky was the color of tin, the kind of day Harold would have called sweater weather, though he never wore one himself. I left a note on the kitchen table, even though no one would read it. A habit, maybe, or something deeper. The wish that someone would come looking, just in case. I hadn't been on the freeway in months. My hands were steady, though, and traffic was light. I parked 2 blocks from the shop to avoid parallel parking. My legs ached a little, but the walk felt good, like a woman still capable of doing things without being told how. The antique shop was tucked between a bookstore and a dry cleaner. Small, but dignified. The window display featured a set of silver teaspoons and a faded photograph of a couple in Edwardian clothing. The sign above the door read, "Hartwell and Sons, Fine Estate Jewelry, Appraisals, Acquisitions. Since 1924. The bell above the door jingled when I stepped inside. The air smelled faintly of old velvet and lemon polish. A man behind the glass counter looked up. Mid-50s, trim, glasses with thin wire frames. "Good morning," he said. "Welcome to Hartwell and Sons. I'm Robert Hartwell. How can I help you today?" I hesitated. I'm not looking to sell. I just want to know what I have." He nodded with a kind smile. "That's often the best place to start." I pulled out the handkerchief and laid the pieces on the velvet mat he offered. The necklace first, then the brooch. He didn't speak right away. He picked up the necklace with gloved fingers, turning it under the light. Then the brooch, then the necklace again. "Do you know the origin of these pieces?" he asked. "Not precisely," I said. "The brooch came through my mother's side. French, supposedly. My grandmother said it was brought during the war, but she never said which one. The necklace belonged to her as well." He didn't respond. He pulled a loop from his breast pocket and examined the clasp of the necklace, then the back of the brooch. His expression didn't change, but something in his posture did. A stiffness, a concentration. He straightened after several long minutes. "May I ask your name?" "Elspeth Crane," I said. "Everyone calls me Elsie." He nodded. "Mrs. Crane, would you mind if I took a few photographs and called in a second opinion? My colleague specializes in European estate pieces." "That's fine," I said. "Is something wrong?" "No," he said, choosing his words carefully. "Nothing wrong. But I believe these are significant." "Significant how?" He smiled, but didn't answer directly. "Let's just say this is not costume jewelry." He took several photographs with a small black camera, then excused himself and disappeared into a back room. I sat on the small velvet bench, my hands folded in my lap. I felt strangely calm. Whatever came next, I'd already faced worse. After 15 minutes, he returned. "My colleague is on her way," he said. "She's not far. Would you mind waiting?" "Not at all," I said. He sat down across from me. "Would you like some tea?" I smiled. Always. He returned with a tray, 2 porcelain cups, a small pot, and shortbread biscuits. The last time someone served me tea on a tray was probably 1972. While we waited, he asked gentle questions. Where I grew up, what I remembered about the jewelry, if I had any old photographs of family wearing the pieces. I did. I told him I'd bring them next time, if there was one. When the door opened again, a woman in her early 60s walked in. Gray streaked hair, high cheekbones, no-nonsense gait. She introduced herself as Margaret Wu, a historical appraiser specializing in pre-war European jewelry. She examined the pieces in silence, nodding once, then again. Her face betrayed no emotion, just the kind of focused neutrality that always precedes something big. She looked up finally. Her voice was quiet. "Mrs. Crane, this brooch. It's not only authentic, it's rare, exceptionally rare. The craftsmanship, the hallmarks, the use of untreated salon sapphires. This is not the kind of thing you find in a drawer. It's a museum-grade piece." I felt like someone had taken the floor out from under me. "As for the necklace," she continued, "I believe it's part of the same set. Possibly commissioned together." "Commissioned by whom?" I asked, my voice barely audible. "We'd have to research further," she said. "But judging by the signatures and the style, my guess is Paris, early 1900s. Possibly even Lalique. This could be worth several $1,000,000. I didn't say anything. I just stared at the tea in my cup, gone cold. "We'd like to document it fully," Margaret said. "There's a protocol. We won't touch ownership, but I'd recommend a safe deposit box. And if you're willing, this might be newsworthy." Newsworthy. Linda's voice rang in my head. "Who wears this kind of junk?" I smiled quietly to myself. "Let me think about it," I said, because I wasn't in a hurry. Not anymore. The ride home felt different. The streets were the same, the lights still timed to make me wait at every intersection. But I didn't mind. I had the necklace and brooch wrapped in a padded envelope this time. Margaret had offered to keep them at the store's vault overnight for safekeeping, but I declined. I wasn't ready to let them out of my sight. Not yet. When I pulled into my driveway, the porch light clicked on automatically. Harold had installed the motion sensor 20 years ago after tripping over the cat and spraining his ankle. "I'm not dying because I forgot the flashlight," he'd said. I smiled at the memory. Inside, I set the envelope on the dining room table like it was a living thing, something that needed to be watched over. I turned off my phone. Linda had called 3 times while I was at the appraisal. I didn't answer, not out of spite. Just clarity. I didn't owe her a call. Not yet. The next morning, I woke up early. Earlier than usual. No dreams, no aches. Just that calm, grounded feeling you get after a thunderstorm. When the world hasn't changed, but you have. The phone rang at 9:02 a.m. Sharp. Sophie. "Did you go?" she asked without even saying hello. Her voice was bubbling with curiosity. "I did." "And?" "They're not junk," I said simply. "Apparently they're very old, very rare." "Grandma," she said softly, "are they worth something?" I paused. "They think so. A lot, in fact. But I'm not sure yet what that means." There was a silence, but not the uncomfortable kind. Sophie didn't push. She never did. That's why I told her what happened. All of it. The appraiser, the second opinion, the words museum grade and newsworthy. When I finished, she let out a breath. "Oh my God. I knew it. I knew it wasn't costume jewelry." "I didn't," I admitted. "I just thought it belonged to people I loved." "It still does," she said. "Only now, the world knows it too." I smiled. That was Sophie, always finding a way to stitch the old and the new together without tearing anything apart. An hour later, the shop called. Margaret wanted to confirm a few details. She asked if I could send old family photos or documents, anything that might help trace the origin of the pieces. I pulled out the cedar box in the bedroom closet, the one with the brittle envelopes and curled photographs. There she was. Eugenia Bell, standing beside a man in a naval uniform. Her chin lifted, the necklace unmistakable against the high lace collar of her blouse. The photo was dated 1911. I scanned it with the little machine Sophie had set up for me last Christmas. That afternoon, Robert called again. "Mrs. Crane," he said gently, "a contact of ours from the Seattle Tribune would like to reach out to you. There's interest in doing a small feature on historical family heirlooms, and this is extraordinary." I sat in silence, one hand resting on the envelope. "I don't want to sell it," I said. "Not yet. Maybe not ever." "Of course," he said. "This isn't about sale, just about history." History? I thought of Linda, scowling at the velvet box, laughing. Nobody's gonna wear that stuff. I thought of Sophie, gently fastening the necklace around her own neck, standing tall like she was stepping into something older than herself. "All right," I said. "Let them call." After I hung up, I sat at the table with the photo. Eugenia's eyes stared back at me, calm, certain, unapologetic. I didn't know what the article would say. I didn't know what Linda would say. But I knew what I would say now if she asked again about the jewelry. It carries things. The reporter's name was Elise Hammond. Polite voice, calm cadence, no breathless excitement. Not the kind of journalist who chases gossip. She introduced herself as someone with a deep interest in personal histories. I believed her, though I still took a full day before agreeing to speak. We met at Hartwell & Sons the next morning. Robert had cleared a quiet corner of the shop, set out tea again, bless the man, and brought out the necklace and brooch, now gently cradled in a custom velvet display. Elise arrived early, notebook in hand, and no camera crew in sight. "This isn't for a headline," she assured me. "It's a human story, not just about jewelry, but what we carry, what we pass down, what gets dismissed." She had kind eyes, and more importantly, she listened without interrupting. I told her what I remembered, how the pieces came to me, how I'd kept them without knowing what they were, How my mother never spoke in detail, only handed them over like something sacred and too heavy to explain. When I spoke of the moment Linda mocked them, Elise's pen paused. She didn't comment, didn't dig, just nodded and let me go on. She asked if we could photograph the necklace. I agreed. Margaret joined us briefly and gave a succinct historical summary. Mid-1900s Parisian design, possibly commissioned during the Art Nouveau surge, with a unique arrangement of untreated sapphires. She mentioned auction houses who had already inquired. I didn't flinch. Elise asked the last question gently. What does it feel like, Mrs. Crane, knowing that something you held so quietly turned out to be extraordinary? I looked at the necklace in the glass. Its blue stone caught the light like water catching sky. I always thought it was beautiful, I said. I just didn't think anyone else would. She smiled. That's the story. The article was published 2 days later in the Sunday edition. Not front page, of course. Nestled somewhere in the art section, under the title, Hidden Histories, the necklace that waited a century. It featured photos of the jewelry, a quote from Margaret about its provenance, and a single black and white photo of Eugenia Bell standing proud in her high-collared blouse, the necklace clear on her chest. There was also a quote from me, though I hadn't realized Elise would use it as a pull quote. It's not just jewelry. It's what survives when no one listens. That morning, I turned off my phone before making tea. I knew there'd be calls. I just didn't want them first thing. By noon, I'd received 9 voicemails. 4 were from people I hadn't heard from in years. 2 old friends, a cousin on the East Coast, even a former neighbor who'd once asked if I needed help with my hedges, but never followed up. And Linda, of course. Her first message was cautious. Hi, Mom. I saw something about you in the paper. Pretty wild, huh? I didn't realize those old things were... Anyway, give me a call when you can. The second was less casual. Mom, I think we need to talk. This is a big deal, and you should have said something. I mean, why didn't you tell me? We're family. The third was something between defensive and desperate. I just think it's weird that you went to a reporter before even telling your own daughter. I mean, come on. I didn't answer any of them. Instead, I sat in my armchair, the newspaper open on my lap, and reread the article slowly. Not for vanity, just validation. Linda had always treated me like background, like an obligation wrapped in linen and dust. Now, suddenly, I wasn't background anymore. I was a headline, modest, quiet, but seen. Later that evening, Sophie stopped by with flowers. Not roses, not lilies, just simple tulips, yellow, my favorite. She hugged me tightly and placed the bouquet on the table without saying anything. You read it? I asked. Twice, she said. I noticed her eyes were shiny. I'm proud of you, she added, so softly it barely made sound. I wanted to say more. Wanted to tell her about the weight of all the years I'd lived quietly, carrying value that nobody recognized, not just in jewelry, but in me. But I didn't. I just reached for her hand. Sometimes the ones who see you don't need to be told a thing. The next morning brought the call I knew was coming. It wasn't Linda, not this time. It was a man named Jason Marks, a producer from a morning talk show in Seattle. He'd seen the Tribune article. He'd loved the human angle. He used words like inspirational and timely, and a beautiful reminder that there's more to people than meets the eye. He wanted me to come on air. Just a short segment, he said. 10 minutes, maybe less. I could bring the necklace, the brooch, maybe a photo of my grandmother. There would be a car service, a dressing room, a professional makeup artist. The full treatment. I asked for time to think. He said, of course, and gave me his direct line. When I hung up, I stared at the kitchen table. The article lay there still, folded neatly beside my teacup. Sophie had underlined the part where I talked about the necklace being what survives when no one listens. That's what they wanted, wasn't it? A sweet little moment. A sentimental old lady with her forgotten treasure. But I wasn't forgotten. Not anymore. And I wasn't sentimental either. Not in the way people meant when they patted your hand and said, "How lovely," with a voice full of condescension. Still, I wasn't sure I wanted to be on television. The thought of bright lights and polished hosts asking curated questions made my stomach flutter. I spent the afternoon on the porch, watching the neighborhood kids ride their bikes. Leaves skittered down the street in little gusts. I remembered being their age, chasing wind with no idea where it came from. That evening, Sophie came by again. She knew somehow, without me telling her. "They called, didn't they?" she asked, setting down a paper bag with dinner inside. I nodded. "Are you going to do it?" I didn't answer right away. Instead, I opened the bag. Roasted chicken, green beans, 2 small rolls. Sophie always knew what I could finish and what would be too much. That, too, is a kind of love. "It feels strange," I finally said, "letting people see me like that." "Grandma," she said gently, "you've been invisible for a long time. Maybe it's time they looked." Her words were soft, but they hit me hard. Not because they were unkind, but because they were true. After dinner, I pulled out the photo of Eugenia Bell again, the same one they used in the article. She stood tall in her white blouse, the necklace gleaming under the high collar. She didn't smile. Women didn't, back then, but her eyes were steady, certain. I thought of Linda, of her dismissive laugh, the way she always spoke to me like I was a stray dog following her too closely. Let them look, I thought. Let them see what they never bothered to ask about. That night, I called Jason back. "I'll do it," I said. His relief was palpable. "That's fantastic, Mrs. Crane, truly. We'll schedule a car for Friday morning, and don't worry. We'll take care of everything. You'll be in good hands." I thanked him and hung up. Then I sat in the quiet and looked at my reflection in the window. Soft hair, soft shoulders, a face that bore every year it had lived. Not glamorous, not viral ready, just real. I wasn't doing this for fame or for validation. I was doing it for every woman who'd ever been told she was just old, just background, just nothing. On Friday morning, I'd sit under their lights and speak with the voice that had been ignored for years, and I wouldn't raise it. I wouldn't need to. I woke before dawn on Friday. The sky outside was still dark, the kind of deep navy that feels like velvet pulled across the world. My house was quiet, the way it always was, but something in the air had shifted. Not nervousness, not fear, just readiness. I laid out my clothes the night before, not anything new, but carefully chosen. A deep plum blouse with long sleeves, soft to the touch. A charcoal skirt that still fit, more or less, and shoes with just the right height to keep me steady. No glitter, no dramatics, just clean lines and quiet dignity. The necklace was already in its box. I'd polished it gently with a cloth the antique shop had given me. Not to make it sparkle, but to remove the fingerprints. Sophie had insisted I wear it. "It belongs on you," she'd said. "That's how people should see it." At 7:15 sharp, the car arrived. Not a limousine, thank God. Just a sleek black sedan, with a young driver who looked barely older than Sophie. He greeted me respectfully, offered me a hand getting in, then let me ride in silence. For that alone, I was grateful. The studio was modern, all glass and chrome and busy people with clipboards. A woman named Julia met me at the entrance, smiling like we were old friends. "We're so honored to have you, Mrs. Crane," she said. "You're going to be wonderful." She led me through a hallway to the green room, which, in fact, was pale blue, and offered coffee, tea, water, anything I wanted. A makeup artist came next, a kind man with gentle hands who brushed a little powder across my cheeks and dabbed my lips with rose-colored gloss. "I won't make you look like someone else," he promised, "just like the best version of yourself." For a moment, I caught my reflection in the mirror. The necklace sat perfectly against my collarbone, like it remembered where it had been all those years. At 8:05, Julia returned. "You're on in 10. The host was named Melissa. Mid-40s, polished, pleasant, but not plastic. She met me backstage and took my hand with a warmth that felt real. "I loved your story," she said. "My grandmother had a brooch she kept in a tin box. I never asked about it. I wish I had." I nodded. "There's still time to ask the next woman." She smiled at that. The stage lights were warm, brighter than I expected. The studio wasn't large, but it was full. Camera crew, producers, a live audience of about 50 people sitting politely in rows. The segment began with a short montage. Images from the Tribune article, a slow pan across the necklace and brooch, the photograph of Eugenia Bell. Then Melissa turned to me, her voice low and clear. "This morning, we're joined by Elspeth Crane, a woman whose quiet family heirloom turned out to be worth more than $3 million, but whose story reminds us that value isn't always measured in dollars." She turned to me. "Mrs. Crane, thank you for being here." I looked into her eyes, then into the camera, and I spoke. I told them about the necklace, how I thought it was just something pretty, handed down from women who never raised their voices. I told them about my grandmother, about the box I kept tucked away for years. I told them about the laugh my daughter gave when she saw it, that small, cruel moment, and how, for the first time, I had chosen not to shrink under it. Melissa asked questions. Soft ones. Thoughtful ones. She let me breathe. "You never had it appraised before?" she asked. "No," I said, "because it wasn't for sale. It was part of me, like a memory you wear." The audience was quiet, not out of boredom, but attention. You can feel the difference. At the end of the segment, Melissa reached over and gently touched the necklace. "It's beautiful," she said. "So were the women who wore it before me." They cut to commercial. The applause wasn't loud, but it was real. A few people stood. Someone in the front row wiped at her eyes. Melissa squeezed my hand. "You did beautifully." Back in the green room, Julia handed me a small card with a list of media inquiries and said, "No pressure. You don't owe anyone anything." That, right there, was the best thing anyone had said to me in years. I took the card, folded it, slipped it into my handbag. Then I stepped outside into the sunlight, the necklace still warm against my skin. The world hadn't changed, but I had. By the time I got home, the phone had turned into a creature. It buzzed, blinked, beeped. Voicemails stacked on voicemails. Text messages like wildfire. Some from numbers I recognized, most from ones I didn't. Reporters, journalists, a woman from a podcast called Heirloom Hour, someone claiming to represent a European art museum, Even a polite inquiry from a Parisian jeweler who said the name Crane had appeared in a handwritten inventory from 1907. I turned the ringer off. Let them talk to themselves. I wasn't going to be rushed. Not anymore. Sophie came by that evening, her face lit up with so much pride I had to look away for a second. "You were brilliant," she said, practically bouncing on her toes. Everyone in the student lounge was talking about it. Even Professor Janek. She said you reminded her of her own grandmother. I smiled and handed her a cup of tea. I didn't mean to become anyone's role model. I just wanted to tell the truth. "Well," she said, taking a sip, "you did. And now everyone wants a piece of you." "That's the problem," I murmured. "They don't want me. They want a headline, a quote, a soundbite with soft lighting and just enough nostalgia." She looked at me quietly, then reached into her bag. "This came to my campus mailbox today." She handed me a cream-colored envelope, hand-addressed. Inside was a short letter on thick, expensive stationery. The Museum of Decorative Arts in Chicago was requesting to initiate a conversation about acquiring the necklace and brooch for their permanent collection of rare 20th century design. "They said it would be insured," Sophie added gently. "Housed in a climate-controlled vault. Displayed with full attribution to your family." My thumb ran along the edge of the letter. For a moment, I saw Eugenia Bell's photograph again. That straight spine. That face like stone carved from something stronger than sorrow. "She didn't carry it through war and silence just to put it behind glass," I said quietly. "But maybe someone should see it. Really see it." We didn't speak for a few minutes. The kettle hissed softly in the background. "Grandma," Sophie said finally, "have you thought about what you want to do with it?" "Keep it," I answered. "For now." But the wheels were turning. The next day, I called Margaret Wu at the antique shop. I asked if she knew any lawyers who specialized in estate trusts. She gave me a name and a number. A man named Arthur Wynne. Old school, she said. Discreet, experienced. That afternoon, I made an appointment. I also took out the box again, not to touch the jewelry, but to look deeper, at the papers beneath. Letters from my mother. A receipt from 1934, barely legible. A note in French I'd never thought to translate. The necklace wasn't just valuable, it was documented. 3 generations of women had kept it safe without knowing its worth. Now it was my turn to decide what worth meant. At sunset, the doorbell rang. Linda. I hadn't heard her car. I hadn't received a call. She stood on the porch like she hadn't mocked me in years, like she hadn't tried to toss my history into the trash a week earlier. She wore too much perfume, as always. Her lipstick was too bright. "I saw the show," she said. I figured. "You didn't tell me." "No," I said. "I didn't." She tried to smile. "You looked good. I mean polished. People are saying, well, they're impressed." "That's new," I said flatly. There was a long pause. She shifted on her feet, eyeing the space behind me like she might invite herself in. "I thought maybe we could talk," she said. "You know, about everything." I looked at her for a moment. My daughter. My only child. The woman who couldn't stand to be in a room with my past until it made the news. "Not today," I said softly. "I have a few things to figure out first." Her face twisted. Not quite a frown. Not quite anything she could weaponize. "Right," she said. "Of course. You're busy now." "I'm just awake now," I replied. She didn't argue, just turned and walked down the steps. That night, I sat at the table and opened the letter from the museum again. I wasn't ready to let go, but I was ready to decide on my own terms. For the first time in a long time, the choice was mine. And that was worth more than all the sapphires in the world. Linda didn't call the next day. That alone told me more than anything she might have said. When control slipped from her hands, she did what she always did: stepped back and waited for the dust to settle. But there was no dust now, just clarity. I spent the morning clearing out the cabinet in the living room, not because of some grand symbolic gesture. I simply wanted the space back. Old porcelain figurines, expired documents, a set of souvenir spoons no one had touched in 20 years. I kept the photo albums. And the jewelry box, of course. That would stay until I decided otherwise. Around noon, Sophie came by with lunch: grilled cheese and tomato soup, comfort food for days when the soul felt sore. She sat cross-legged on the couch, like she had as a child, watching me with quiet alertness. "She's going to try again," she said finally. "I know. What will you say?" I didn't answer right away. Instead, I reached for the letter I'd drafted the night before. It wasn't long, just a page, handwritten in the same neat cursive I'd used since Catholic school. I handed it to Sophie. She read it in silence, then folded it carefully. "She won't like it. She doesn't have to," I replied. "She just has to understand it's final." Later that afternoon, I mailed it. No dramatic delivery. No phone call to brace her, just an envelope on cream paper, addressed in my hand. Inside, the letter read, "Linda, what you said about my jewelry was cruel. What you've said, and left unsaid, for years has cut deeper than you realize. I don't need an apology now. I needed it years ago. I've set up a trust for Sophie. The necklace and brooch will go into a foundation bearing your grandmother's name, Eugenia Bell Crane, for historical preservation and education. It will be used to support scholarships for young women pursuing history, art, or archival studies. They won't be sold. You will not inherit them. This isn't punishment. It's restoration." We all leave behind echoes. I'm choosing what mine will sound like. Elsie. The next morning, I received 3 calls from Linda in the span of 30 minutes. I didn't pick up. By midday, there was a knock on the door. I opened it to find her standing on the porch again, this time without makeup, without that brittle armor she always wore. She didn't speak right away. "You really meant it?" she asked. "I wrote it down, didn't I?" "You're cutting me out." I met her gaze. "No, I'm cutting you off from what you never respected. That's not the same thing." Her eyes shimmered, but I knew her tears. They weren't for me. They were for the things she thought she'd have forever. "It was just a stupid comment," she muttered. "You're overreacting." "It was 20 years of stupid comments," I said. "You made me small every time I remembered who I used to be. And now I've remembered. And I don't feel small anymore." She didn't answer, didn't apologize. She turned and walked back to her car. No slamming door, no dramatic scene, just silence. But it didn't feel empty. It felt like space. That evening, I went through the paperwork from Mr. Wynn's office. The trust had been formalized. Sophie's name was listed clearly as the trustee. The necklace and brooch would pass to the foundation upon my death, with the option for her to wear them at significant life events. Not sold, not split up, not forgotten. I sat on the porch with a blanket across my knees, watching the sky burn pink. The kind of sky that makes you believe in something beyond explanation. I thought of Eugenia, of Delia, of the women who came before me, who lived full lives in small spaces, whose voices were quiet but not weak. Linda might never understand. But Sophie did. And that was enough. The first time Sophie held the official trust documents in her hands, she didn't say anything. She just read them, slowly, carefully, the way someone reads a letter from a person they thought they'd lost. We were in the kitchen. Sunlight poured through the window like it had on the day she helped me make jam the summer she turned 11. She had flour on her nose that day. Now she had ink on her fingers and the weight of something much larger in her lap. "I don't know what to say," she whispered. "You don't have to say anything," I replied. But she did anyway. No one's ever trusted me with something this big. Not even my parents. I mean, Dad still double checks when I pay the power bill. I smiled. "That's because he sees you as a child. I don't." She looked up at me, eyes glassy. "I want to make you proud." "You already have." She reached for my hand across the table. We sat like that for a while. No big speeches, no declarations. Just skin on skin, the kind of quiet touch that carries more than language ever could. Later, she helped me file the copies in the safe. It was Harold's old lockbox, once used for tax documents and a backup of our will. Now it held something far more important: direction. We were about to put it away when she turned to me suddenly. "Grandma," she said, "why didn't you give it to Mom? I mean, besides the obvious." I didn't answer right away. Because the truth was, Linda wouldn't have known what to do with the responsibility. She saw value in currency, in status, in optics. But legacy? That was invisible to her. And worse, she treated it like clutter. "I gave it to the person who listened," I said simply. Sophie blinked, then nodded, her mouth tightening into a line of determination. "Then I'll protect it. I promise." I believed her. The following week, the Foundation's paperwork was finalized. I received a letter from the museum expressing admiration and support. They asked to borrow the necklace and brooch for a year-long exhibition titled "Women Who Endured: Jewelry and the Quiet Power of Inheritance." I agreed on 2 conditions: full historical credit under the name Eugenia Bell Crane and a visible plaque explaining the significance of unrecorded family legacies. Sophie helped draft the language. She insisted we include a quote from my interview. "It's not just jewelry. It's what survives when no one listens." She said it would mean something to girls her age. Girls like her. That same day, I received an envelope from Linda. No return address, but I recognized the handwriting. Her script had changed over the years. Tighter now, more angular. But the loops on her L's gave her away. Inside was a single sheet of paper. Typed. "Mom, I'm sorry. I didn't understand what any of it meant. The stories, the jewelry, the way you carried it all. I thought it was about money. I was wrong. I know I can't fix everything, but I do want to try. If you're willing. Linda." There was no flourish, no excuses. Just words. I didn't cry. I didn't even feel relief. Just a kind of unfreezing. Like someone had opened a window in a room I hadn't noticed was stuffy. That evening, I sat in the living room with a cup of tea and looked at the envelope for a long time. Then I placed it in the back of the photo album. Between a picture of Linda at 8 and another of her holding Sophie as a baby. It didn't make anything perfect, but it meant something had moved. And sometimes that's all we can hope for. Arthur Wynn's office was nothing like I expected. No towering shelves of leather-bound books or heavy curtains. Just a clean, quiet space with large windows and a pot of jasmine tea already steeping on a tray. Sophie came with me, not because I needed her, but because I wanted her there. Arthur was tall and soft-spoken, with silver hair and the kind of calm that makes you sit straighter without realizing it. He reminded me of my late husband in the way he listened. Fully, without interruption, like every word I spoke had weight. We sat across from him at a broad oak desk while he reviewed the finalized documents. "The Crane Foundation is officially registered," he said, tapping the top page with a well-kept fingernail. "The jewelry is now listed as assets under its name. You, Mrs. Crane, are the primary benefactor. Ms. Sophie Crane is the sole trustee." Sophie shifted in her seat, eyes scanning every line, absorbing. "There is a clause," Arthur continued, "that stipulates the items may not be sold, gifted, or distributed without unanimous approval from all future trustees. That was your request, correct?" "Yes," I said. "They're not to be divided." "They're not property. They're legacy." He nodded. "Well said." We signed the final pages. I watched Sophie's hand move across the line beside mine. Her signature, a little slanted, a little unsure, but hers, completely. When we were done, Arthur placed the documents into a heavy envelope and stood to shake our hands. "You've done something rare here," he said. "Most people wait until after they're gone. You've chosen to act while you're still watching. That's power most families never see." I didn't know what to say to that, so I said, "Thank you." We stepped out into the hallway and then the street. Autumn had truly settled in now. Crisp air, golden leaves skittering along the sidewalk, the smell of chimney smoke somewhere in the distance. Sophie slipped her arm into mine. "Can I ask you something?" she said. "Of course." "Do you think she'll be angry forever?" I didn't need to ask who she meant. "No," I said. But anger was never the problem. It was entitlement. And I think maybe this is the first time in her life someone said no to it. Sophie didn't respond right away. "I keep thinking," she said finally, "about that time in 7th grade when she told me not to wear your necklace to the school dance. She said it made me look old." I laughed. "I remember. You wore it anyway." "Of course I did," she grinned. "I looked like I walked out of a French painting." "That's because you did," I said. "You come from a long line of women who survived storms in silence." "Not anymore," she said, not silent. That night, we had dinner together. Nothing fancy, just roast chicken and potatoes, a salad, some red wine we found dusty in my cabinet. After we ate, Sophie pulled out her laptop and showed me the website she was building for the foundation. The front page had the museum's exhibition announcement, a photo of the necklace, and 3 words in bold: "History worn quietly." "I thought it would be good to tell the story properly," she said. "Not just in glass cases or articles, but in your words." "I've never built a website," I said. "Good," she replied. "That means it'll actually work." We laughed, and it wasn't the light laughter of politeness. It was deep, belly-felt, head-thrown-back laughter, the kind that empties a little sadness out with every sound. After she left, I sat at the table alone. The house was still, but not heavy. I poured myself another half glass of wine, something Harold used to call a just-in-case pour, and took out the envelope of trust documents. I held them, not to reread, but to feel the weight of them, the truth in them. I had given Sophie more than jewelry. I'd given her roots and direction, a voice not built on anger, but on ownership. For decades, I'd been told to give quietly, to endure gracefully, to diminish so others could shine. Now I had chosen to give on my own terms, loud in my silence, steady in my refusal. That's the difference between inheritance and legacy. One is taken. The other is entrusted. Linda came again on a Wednesday. No call, no warning, just the knock on the screen door and her silhouette behind the lace curtain, like the ghost of all the conversations we'd never had. I opened the door slowly. This time, she didn't step forward. Just stood there in her slacks and navy sweater, arms crossed, lips pressed into a line that could have been remorse or just resistance. "I read the article again," she said, "and the foundation page." I waited. I saw Sophie's name, and yours, and Grandma's. Still, I said nothing. "You really meant it," she added, her voice softer than I'd heard in years. "Yes," I said. "I really meant it." She looked down at her shoes. I didn't know how far things had gone. "You didn't ask," I replied. "For years." She flinched, but I didn't soften it. I wasn't trying to hurt her. I was just done cushioning the truth. She stepped closer. "Why didn't you talk to me first?" I raised an eyebrow. About the necklace? The foundation? Or about how tired I am of being the one who always swallows things whole? That stopped her. She opened her mouth, then closed it again. "You know," I continued, "when you were 8, you used to sit at this very table and play with that brooch. You'd tell me it looked like a bird carrying secrets. You don't remember that now, but I do. I remember everything." She blinked hard. "I remember when you stopped asking where things came from, when you stopped calling if you didn't need something, when you started sighing every time you walked through this door like I was a mess you had to clean up." "I didn't mean it that way," she murmured. "Maybe not. But that's how you left it." I let the words settle between us, heavy and clean. Then I stepped aside and gestured for her to come in. To my surprise, she did. She walked slowly, looking at everything like she was seeing it for the first time. The glass cabinet, the photograph of Eugenia in the hallway, the framed copy of the Tribune article Sophie had hung beside my kitchen calendar. She stood in front of it for a long time. "Do you really think I don't care?" she asked, not turning around. "I think you never learned how to care without control." She nodded, like she'd been waiting for someone to say it. Then she turned and faced me fully. "I was angry at you," she said, "for a long time. After Dad died, after everything changed, I wanted you to be someone else. Less fragile. More convenient," I offered. "Predictable," she said. "So I could feel strong. And when you weren't, I punished you for it." The honesty knocked the air out of the room for a moment. "I thought I was protecting myself," she went on. "But all I was doing was making you smaller, because your softness scared me." I felt something shift inside me. Not forgiveness. Not yet. But maybe a loosening. I walked over to the kitchen drawer and pulled out a folded sheet of paper. It was a second copy of the Foundation Trust, the one I'd meant to keep for backup, but never needed. I handed it to her. Her hands trembled as she took it. "I'm not giving you a role in this," I said quietly. "Not now. Maybe not ever. But you can know what it is. You can understand what it protects." She looked up at me, eyes glistening. "Thank you." "I didn't do this to punish you, Linda," I said. "I did it to remind myself I still had choices. That my silence wasn't the same as absence." She nodded slowly. "I think I've been silent too, in the wrong ways." I poured her a cup of tea. No ceremony, no sugar cubes, no long-lost warmth. Just 2 cups on a quiet table between 2 women trying to look each other in the eye again. We didn't talk much after that. She stayed for half an hour, asked a few questions about the museum, the exhibit, the scholarship Sophie was drafting in Eugenia's name. I told her the truth, nothing more. When she stood to leave, she paused by the doorway. "I'm not expecting anything," she said, "but I hope someday you'll let me help." I didn't answer right away. I just said, "You know where the door is." She nodded. Then she used it, gently this time. No slamming, no finality. Just the sound of it closing like a page, not a door. I sat back down at the table and ran my finger over the rim of my teacup. There was no joy in that conversation, but there was peace, and that I'd learned was its own kind of victory. The house felt different after Linda left. Not quieter. It had always been quiet, but lighter somehow, as if the weight of something long unsettled had finally shifted, even if just a little. I didn't feel triumphant. I didn't feel vindicated. What I felt was more surprising. I felt like myself. It had been so long since I'd been fully in that feeling, not the role of mother or widow or polite old woman. People nod at in the grocery store. Just me. Elspeth Crane. A woman with a story and a spine, and a voice no longer held in her chest like a breath she was afraid to exhale. The next morning, I received a package from the museum. Inside was a proof of the exhibition placard. A simple white board, matte finish, no frills. At the top, Eugenia Bell Crane, Inheritance and Quiet Power. Below that, a small paragraph. This necklace and brooch belonged to 3 generations of women whose lives were marked by resilience, restraint, and reverence. Passed through time without public recognition, these pieces represent the strength of private legacy. Preserved by Elspeth Crane and entrusted to her granddaughter Sophie, they are now shared not as artifacts, but as living memory. At the bottom, a final line. It's not just jewelry. It's what survives when no one listens. Elspeth Crane. I ran my fingers over the surface of the board, tracing the indent of my name. I didn't cry. There wasn't anything left to release. What I felt instead was grounding, like standing barefoot in soil you'd almost forgotten was still warm. Sophie arrived shortly after noon, bubbling as usual. She'd brought her laptop and a stack of grant applications. "There are already 4 students who qualify," she said. "All first-generation women studying archival history. It's wild, Grandma. They wrote essays about never seeing themselves in textbooks. And now this helps pay for them to change that." I watched her as she spoke. She was alive in her own skin, full of purpose. I thought about how different she was from Linda at that age. Not better, just freer. "When I was 23, I said quietly, I didn't know what I wanted. I only knew what I was supposed to want." Sophie looked up. "What did you want?" I thought about that. The answer came easily. To be taken seriously, without having to get loud. She smiled. "You did that." We spent the rest of the afternoon working side by side. I reviewed the letters from the museum's education coordinator, while Sophie typed responses to donors. We didn't speak much, but we didn't need to. There was something sacred in the shared work. In the quiet clicking of keys, the occasional clink of a teacup, the presence of 2 women building something out of what had once been invisible. As evening settled in, Sophie packed her things. Before she left, she paused in the hallway, looking at the old photo of Eugenia. "She looks like you," she said. "She'd say I look like her." Sophie turned and kissed my cheek. "Same thing." After she left, I wandered the house with the slow steps of someone reacquainting herself with her own space. I passed the bedroom, our bedroom, mine and Harold's, and didn't flinch. I paused by the glass cabinet and didn't feel shame. I looked at the worn couch, the threadbare rug, the scuffed banister, and didn't see decay. I saw evidence, not of age, of life. That night, I didn't turn on the television. I didn't reach for the paper or scroll through articles about the exhibition. I made a small supper, poured one glass of wine, and sat with it like a guest I was finally ready to welcome. When I finished, I went to the closet. The box was still there. Not the jewelry box, but the old cedar one with letters, records, scraps of lace, and a tin of buttons no one had used in 50 years. I pulled it out and sat on the floor. Slowly, I began to sort. Not everything needed to be saved, but some things did. I found a postcard from 1958, sent from Paris. I'd forgotten about it. It was from Delia, my mother, during her only trip abroad. On the back, in faded ink. Found something here that made me think of you. We'll bring it home. I never knew what it was. Maybe it had been the necklace, or the brooch. Or maybe it had been a truth she never said aloud. That women in our family didn't always know how to speak, but they carried meaning in the things they left behind. I set the postcard aside, along with the lace handkerchief and a yellowed newspaper clipping announcing my parents' engagement. These would go into the archive, not for the museum, for Sophie, for whoever came next. Later, I crawled into bed and turned off the light. I didn't dream of treasure or crowds or television shows. I dreamt of a long table in a quiet room where 3 women sat beside one another, each wearing the same necklace. They didn't speak, but they were listening, and that was enough. It rained the morning of the exhibition, not the kind of wild, sweeping rain that makes you feel alive. No, this was soft rain, steady, measured, the kind that gently reminds you how time moves, how seasons turn, how even the sky knows when to let go. Sophie picked me up in a borrowed car, a sensible sedan from her friend who worked part-time valet and owed her a favor. She wore a navy dress and a long gray coat, her hair pinned back, a single pearl in each ear. Understated, elegant. Like she knew the weight of what she was carrying and didn't need to show it off. I wore a dark green coat I hadn't touched in years, one with a velvet collar and deep pockets. It still fit, more or less. Around my neck, the necklace. Just for the walk-in. The museum would take it from there, place it behind glass, under light, in a case where no one could touch it again. It was a farewell of sorts, though I didn't feel grief. I felt, finally, ready. When we arrived, the museum doors opened automatically, like they knew who we were. Inside, it was warm and bright, not like the dusty, solemn spaces you see in films. There were children laughing somewhere in the distance. A school group, I assumed. I liked that. The idea that the past didn't have to be quiet to be respected. A young woman from the museum met us at the front desk. She greeted Sophie by name and me with both hands clasped gently around mine. Her name was Raquel. She was the curator's assistant, and she told us, with soft excitement, that the room was already filling. They read the article, she said, but I think they came for the feeling behind it. That idea of legacy, of being seen. She led us through a wide hall with tall ceilings and white walls, then into the exhibit room. And there it was. A glass case, the necklace, the brooch, and beside it, the placard. Eugenia Bell Crane, Inheritance and Quiet Power. Donated by her granddaughter, Elspeth Crane, in trust to Sophie Crane and the Crane Foundation for Women's Historical Legacies. Beneath it, the quote, "It's not just jewelry. It's what survives when no one listens." I felt the air leave my chest, not in sorrow, but reverence. Sophie stood beside me, her hand in mine. Do you want to sit? She asked. No, I said. I want to stand. Let them see I still can. People began to trickle in. Some came alone, some in pairs. A few older women nodded to me quietly, as if they understood without needing to speak. A man in a wool coat stood with his arms folded, staring at the necklace like it had said something to him. One woman approached me slowly. She looked about my age, maybe a little older. She wore a floral scarf and carried a cane. I just wanted to say, she whispered, my mother had a ring like that. No one ever asked her where it came from. We buried her with it. I nodded. Sometimes, what we bury is louder than what we keep. She smiled, touched my arm, and moved on. Around noon, Melissa from the television segment arrived. She wasn't filming this time, just watching. She waved to me across the room, respectful, distant, but warm. She didn't need another interview. She'd already heard everything she needed. And then, as I stood near the back of the room, watching the reflection of the necklace in the glass, Linda arrived. Alone. No fanfare, no flourish. She wore a charcoal coat, no jewelry, no lipstick. Just her. She didn't look at me right away. She walked up to the display case and stood in front of it for a long time. Then she turned. Her eyes met mine. There was no performance in her expression, just a soft sadness and something else. Recognition, maybe. She came over slowly. I came to see it, she said. I thought I should. I nodded. It's worth seeing. She looked down. I didn't know how much I didn't know. That's the thing about the past, I said. You don't have to remember all of it, but you do have to stop ignoring it. She swallowed hard. I've been thinking, I don't want to be the one who gets left out of the photo albums. You never were, I said. You just stopped showing up in the pictures. She gave a shaky laugh. That sounds like something Dad would have said. No, I said gently. That sounds like something I would have said. If I'd let myself. We didn't hug. We didn't cry. But we stood side by side for a long time, looking at the necklace. And in that silence, I felt something soften again. Maybe not forgiveness, but the beginning of it. Sophie came over a few minutes later, slipped an arm around me. The first scholarship recipient is here, she said. She wants to meet you. I turned. A young woman, maybe 19, maybe 20, stood by the entryway. She wore glasses and a long cardigan and held a folder against her chest like it was armor. Her eyes sparkled with nerves. I walked toward her, slow and steady, each step sure. When I reached her, she extended her hand. Ms. Crane, it's an honor. I took her hand in both of mine. No, dear, I said. The honor's mine. You're the reason this matters. She smiled. Not a polite smile, but one full of something new. That's when I realized it wasn't just my voice that had survived. It was our voice now. Mine, Eugenia's, Sophie's, hers. And maybe someday, Linda's too. The past wasn't gone. It had finally been heard. If this story meant something to you, share it. Or ask your own mother what she never told you. Sometimes the most valuable things aren't the ones we inherit. They're the ones we finally understand.